everyone to another spectacular episode of the Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities presents Hometown Haunts. I'm your host, Kat Klockow, and tonight with me we have Christina Wald and Jen Koehler and a whole bunch of weird things that have gone on in the world this week and a Cincinnati ghost story.
Woohoo!
Woo! So first, with our social media, you can catch us on Twitter at cincycuriosities or on Instagram, Cincy Cabinet of Curiosities. You can also email your own hometown haunts at cincycuriosities@gmail.com. It doesn't have to be Cincinnati located. It can be from anywhere in the world. We love hearing your own hometown haunts. Also, we're an official podcast on iTunes and SoundCloud. Find us on iTunes at Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities. Please rate and review us, and also on YouTube so other spooky lovers can find us. The link, like always, is in the show notes. Also, Christina, we have a Kickstarter update.
Yes, we have everything here. We've got everything signed. We've got everything boxed up. There's the book. It is gorgeous. Do a quick flip through. Look, it's
This is awkward. This is Christina's.
Woo! And the book just
sorry.
looks amazing, and we have everything. The only snag, I was going to ship most of the stuff today, but unfortunately, everybody decided they were going to be shipping today. And oh, nice.
Yeah.
Everybody.
This is Jay and Dylan's work.
Nice.
And then, let's see, we got Brandon Wagner's. This is the Cincinnati Music Hall.
Nice.
And,
it's beautiful.
Yeah, he did his like a Penny Dreadful. Let's see. Then we have Jamie Filer's Wonderful Mothman, which is available as a print. And then we got Christina's Satan's Hollow.
How fun.
Yes.
And so we were going to ship everything today, but unfortunately, nice.
This is Kevin Necessary's Frogman.
That
Nice.
seems to keep the spirit of the Frogman too.
It's so good. And then this one is Ronnie Fikes, the Loveland Castle.
Nice. Your camera's catching it pretty well.
Good. I'm glad to hear
It's
that.
like in focus.
And then this is Lauren's Public Monster.
Nice.
I particularly love how whimsical it is with his feet.
That's a beautiful perspective too.
Mm-hmm. It's one that you don't usually see.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got James's Bigfoot.
Oh, that's Tank.
Sorry.
But
Sorry, Tank. Sorry, Tank. That's even better. This is Ohio Grassman.
yeah. And then, of course,
Where's
Sedamsville is how you pronounce it, according to the
Damsville? You mean I was
pronounced it the whole time, and I was like, "We have a pronunciation."
Sedamsville. Where's Tim's?
Damn.
There's Tim's.
So I think that's actually.
There's Tim's.
Yay!
Froggy Go Courtin. This is wonderful. And then yes, Sedamsville. So we were correct with our first initial.
Yeah.
Wow.
Sedamsville.
Sedamsville. Wait, let me get back.
Which seems like it's more appropriate.
Sedamsville.
Dams.
I mean, that sounds like that sounds scarier, actually.
Yeah.
So I would say Sedamsville sounds correct for the area, but
Sedamdville. That would be a good name of
I like my ghost.
Yes.
Oh,
creepy
I love
ghost.
that ghost too.
Yeah, he's creepy.
I
But
gotta find Natty. Where's Natty?
in my story, I think page 2 or 3 of my story. Yeah.
And there's Natty. Hi there, Natty.
I love him.
So we got our wonderful cover by Tom Miller,
Yes.
and then our back
gorgeous.
cover by Eamon.
Yeah.
And this is him with the Viking right
yeah.
there.
That kind of reminds me of Tales from the Crypt.
Thank you.
Yeah, it does kind of
Yeah.
it does kind of have that vibe, especially
It does.
each one will have different topics and stuff.
Mhm.
So hopefully I will get it in mail tomorrow. I'm hoping if I log on at a very strange time, not everybody else will be logging on, because when I logged on, at first I couldn't even log on, and then when I did, whenever I tried to get postage on something, it would just kick me out. And it's because everybody, I think they said on the news, my sister-in-law said that they were telling people that if you wanted to get it there by Christmas, you had to send it by the 15th. So everybody was sending it by the 15th. And so unfortunately their servers are not designed to have that crush, but everything is in motion. So you can even see a box behind me here. I'm going to take my...
Woo! We're going to a field trip.
You can even see a box of boxes where I'm starting to... And you see how messy my desk is? Because whenever you do something like this, your studio becomes a huge mess.
Yeah.
So,
something
I mean, not that that's unusual for my studio not to be a mess, but it's even messier right now when you're packaging 200 things.
You may want to adjust it a little bit. There we go.
Yes. So when you're mailing 200, things, it makes it difficult.
Yeah.
But they are on their way. It's not for lack of trying.
Yeah.
We were doing our desperate signing of books this weekend, which involved...
that was fun.
It was like passing off the torch.
Yeah. There was a weird, crazy version of telephone that involved cars because we were all driving to each other's places, delivering the books, and then very carefully signing them all. And I know with me, I washed my hands and made sure everything was sanitary. So anyway,
but yes, it's coming.
And then are we going to do a volume 2 or an issue 2?
Of course we are.
So I believe those submissions will open next month for a whole new crop of artists and writers to tell their stories about creepy Cincinnati.
Yes. Well, almost all news. There will be some new, some old, some new.
Yeah. I believe Christina and I are hanging around.
Yes. But we will have some new blood, if you will.
Yes. Most of it will be new.
Yeah, most of it will be new. And so you're going to be putting your dossier together, and people will be proposing story ideas, and then you get the hard, most difficult job of figuring out what goes in the next book.
Well, I enjoy it. Obviously, we've managed to keep this podcast going for 3 months? And this is all just finding stories. Maybe you'll see some of the stories we cover on this podcast in the future volumes or issues. But so stay tuned. More information. If you're an interested artist or writer and you're in the Cincinnati area, we'll let you know. Just pay attention to our social media, and we'll let you know when those pitches are open, basically.
And if you want to email us and you have an idea that's like gnawing at you that you would like to propose, you can always do that as well. And maybe if it's a Cincinnati thing that's cool that we haven't done yet, you never know.
Yeah, I don't know everything. I'm always learning. So
it's a big city with a lot of haunted people.
Big city, lots of people are strange, and this city's been around for a while. But speaking of strange and weird things, Christina, weird things we saw this week.
Yes. Well, and I don't know if this is weird, perhaps it's just unusual, because it's the first time in 800 years you're going to see what they call the Christmas star, but really it's a planet that's extremely bright. And I've noticed, there are a couple extremely bright bodies right now out in the sky. So now's a good time.
I'm gonna refrain from making any kind of joke.
Oh, come on, you can make a joke. If you're feeling voyeuristic with the planets around the Earth, get your telescope out and see what Saturn is. I think they said Saturn's the closest. Let's see, let me get to the website. I think it's Saturn and Jupiter. Yeah, a rare conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn that will make them look like a single point of light. So they're like a double star.
Ooh.
And it hasn't been seen since the Middle Ages. So that's going to be really exciting. And it actually will segue into your story, because I'm sure the observatory, unfortunately due to COVID, events like this are much curtailed, but often when you have astronomical events like this, you can go to the Cincinnati Observatory, and they have some really great programming. I'm not sure how you pronounce Dean's last name.
Regis, I think.
Regis is, he
Yeah.
is in charge of the programming there, and has a lot of really interesting shows about that sort of thing. So they might have some sort of socially distanced
Well, they do.
opportunity to watch.
Yeah, they do. So I was going to talk about it a little bit later in the show, but this is perfect opportunity right now. So we're going to be talking about the Cincinnati Observatory and its history and everything. But before that, we do want to promote going to the Cincinnati Observatory. It's a wonderful little resource. It's a gem on the east side of the city. It's in Mount Lookout, which is named for the observatory. And they do year-round programming. You can go do free seminars. They do moon viewing parties, which I've done a few times. And they have the different directors of the observatory actually hosting it. And it's a bunch of wonderful events. They have stuff for kids. They have stuff for adults. I really support and urge people to go join and watch it. I know Mike and I have done it a few times. Our particular street, we have a number of families that have telescopes because astronomy is kind of our hobby, and we'll do moon viewing parties. Like on Halloween, there was a full moon, so we were out there socially distanced, everyone in their own yard, but watching the moon, or when the ISS passes by, or any other cool satellite feature. When we had the comet a few months ago, we set up a comet viewing party, and you can actually, a friend of mine is a docent there, and she was able to get rent a higher power telescope and watch the comet and all that. So fun stuff.
Excellent.
Yeah. So
what weird things did you see this week?
Okay, so still talking about the Cincinnati Observatory. I was trying very, very hard this morning, to go take B-roll for our show. I know we're recording this on Monday, and usually we have this all put together by Tuesday night so that all of you can enjoy it on a Wednesday. Well, as long as I get this film footage to Christina, you'll see it on the show. We'll see if it happens. But I was almost out the door this morning to go take the B-roll and photos for social media when we had a bank robbery in my neighborhood. Wow. And we had a helicopter circling overhead. K9 units were brought out. They blockaded one of the main thoroughfares that I would have used to get there. And I was just like, well, I guess this isn't meant to be today. I will try for tomorrow morning. Hopefully no other bank will get held up in the city. But that was a surprise. And it went on for hours. And as of the time right now, which is 7:30 p.m., they still haven't caught the guy. He got away.
Almost unbelievable.
Yeah,
Wow.
He ran towards my house. So that was also really scary. So
which bank was it? Was it
the U.S. Bank on Hyde Park Square.
Oh.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
I'm sure
and he ran toward
plastered on the news this evening.
It's plastered on the news. I have the Citizen app on my phone, which is how I first learned about it, and got the dispatch recordings and everything about that, and video, and which I'm glad I had it, because I would have just driven right into it. He escaped on foot down Michigan Avenue, so that's towards my house, which doesn't make me happy. So
no, not at all.
This is the second time in a month that we've had banks robbed near my house. The other one was on Edwards and Madison. So again,
I guess if they're not going to pass a stimulus program, maybe people are giving themselves a personal stimulus.
That could be. That could be. These particular places get robbed, I don't want to say frequently, but a few times a year. So we go on lockdown. And now that everyone's working from home, we were just like, well, guess we're just turning on the security cameras. I don't know.
I do have observatory photos from Urban Sketchers. If you want to use them
there.
They're not current. It's from the summer.
That's fine.
I will send
it's
you
not
some.
Like this place changed much.
I have a sketch from there, but not, unfortunately, I was not able to go to the sketch day that they had there, but I have an earlier sketch.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you can share those. Yeah.
What else? What other weird things do you have?
So just more of a history note for the Cincinnati area. Our first person to get the COVID-19 vaccine is Katie Walls, an RN from the cardiovascular ICU at University of Cincinnati Medical Center. So I just wanted to note that we're starting to see the vaccines finally be dispersed around the population. Yes. We will soon see if this turns into the zombie apocalypse or not. We'll see how true those horror movies truly were, or if we're just stuck in here for another year. So
the zombie apocalypse already happened, but it wasn't caused by COVID.
No.
And that's all I'm going to say.
Okay. And then my final also weird note, I'm just moving on from there.
No comment.
No comment, just going to keep going. So Mexican archaeologists uncover facade of Aztec skull tower in the capital.
Oh, nice.
And this kind of goes with what Jen's talking about tonight, which is why kind of also covering this. So this is actually just an add-on to a previous news article from about 5 years ago. So Mexico City, via Reuters, archaeologists have unearthed a new section of a famous Aztec tower of human skulls dating back to the 1400s beneath the center of Mexico City, authorities said on Friday. So this was a few days old. The team uncovered in March the facade of an eastern side of the tower, as well as 119 human skulls of men, women, and children, added to hundreds of previously found skulls, according to the National Institute of Anthropology and History, or INAH. The tower, approximately 16.4 feet tall, or 5 meters in diameter, was first discovered 5 years ago. It is believed to be part of the Huey-Zomplantli, I'm going to get this, Huey-Zomplantli, a huge array of skulls that struck fear in the Spanish conquistadors when they captured the city under Hernan Cortez in 1521. So this is basically a huge cylindrical rack of skulls, and they're actually called Zomplanti, and Huey-Zomplantli is the this particular one. And it's really interesting to look at. Maybe we'll find some images to use. But what this does is kind of upend the idea that only tough males were used for sacrifices during Aztec times during this particular time set. Instead, we see that women and children were also used. And they were, as we've discovered, as anthropologists have discovered through study, highly decorated for becoming these sacrifices to gods. So it wasn't just war criminals being sacrificed. This was a huge honor for whomever was sacrificed. And they were treated very well from what anthropologists have found. But this actually changes the dynamics of who was part of the sacrificial group. It wasn't just men, it was also women and children. So that's where the importance of this is. So Jen, please talk about what you found this week.
Well, once you mentioned that, it reminded me of the bone churches. And previously, I only thought there was one, but there's multiples throughout the world. But
surprise!
I mean, it makes sense for some reason to me. I don't know why, but the one I particularly remember is the one. I am going to butcher these I can't even say the word.
Is it Sedlec?
Sure.
Sedlec.
Sedlec. In Czech, right?
The Czech Republic.
And
I'm just winging it. I'm just trying.
That looks really awesome. I wish I'd seen that when I was in the Czech Republic.
Oh, I'm surprised they didn't push you that way. Sorry, Jen. Please continue.
Yeah, please continue.
No, you're fine.
Awesome.
This is the famous
It's a Church
one.
of All Saints, and you walked at. This is an article from CNN from 2019. It says, down a small staircase in the lower chamber of this Roman Catholic church lies the Sedlec ossuary.
Ossuary.
Thank you. Which is adorned with around 40,000 human skeletons. Dubbed the Church of Bones, the story behind the grisly attraction begins in 1278 when the king of Bohemia sent the abbot of Sedlec this dubbed the Church of Bones. It's an All Saints Roman Catholic church in Sedlec. The Sedlec ossuary, and it's in Czech. And it was dubbed the Church of Bones. The story behind the grisly attraction begins in 1278 when the king of Bohemia sent an abbot to a monastery in Jerusalem. He's said to have come back with a jar of soil from Golgotha, the site where the crucifixion of Jesus Christ is said to have occurred, and spread it around the local cemetery. When news of the holy soil became public, people from all over the region started requesting to be buried there. The bones that currently reside in Sedlec ossuary were exhumed from this site in the 15th century to make room for the town's expansion, as well as new burials. They apparently lay stacked in the basement of this Gothic church until 1870, when a wood carver named František Rent was appointed to excavate and organize them. The result is spectacularly shocking. This underground chapel contains a chandelier made entirely of bones, as well as garlands of human skulls. To the left of the chandelier sits a coat of arms formed of the bones of the Schwarzenbergs, an aristocratic Czech family who once ruled over the city.
Wow.
Meanwhile, a collection of human skulls piled on top of each other stands to the right. Each is accompanied by religious displays arranged out of bone, reminding visitors that the chapel remains a respectful place of worship, despite its rather macabre contents. And the site welcomed around 450,000 tourists in 2018.
Not this year.
Not this year. In 2019, it was estimated 500,000 would visit.
I wish I'd seen the catacombs when I was in Paris. The first time I was in Paris, I got a really bad cold, so I didn't think I was going to be very good walking through those damp areas. And then, they had a huge strike happening in France last time I was there, so they were closed.
They were closed for maintenance when I was there, and I was very upset. And Mike had to buy me a tuna sandwich to calm me down.
The day probably didn't work though.
Oh, I don't know. Did I was a little hangry, but it was just like, hey, I've traveled all this time, and I was dumb and didn't bother looking at a maintenance schedule.
Well, it's not something you really think about until it happens, right?
Yeah, and then now it's something I do think about when I'm planning trips.
See?
Make sure.
But then there's always now with the internet, it's so much easier. I mean,
it is.
Back in the day, like it wasn't like you could look on their website and say, "Oh, it's closed right now."
I don't have an excuse. I went when internet was a thing, so I was just dumb.
In the before times.
In the before times, though.
When you used to travel without internet, different experience.
But this is not a unique thing that happened. So I found an article on Discovery, also from 2019, that lists 4 other locations for churches made out of bones. It's backwards. Okay, so there's one in Capuchin crypts in Rome, maybe? Italy.
No, it's Capuchin.
Capuchin, okay. Because they call the monkeys Capuchin in Costa Rica, but it's probably like a mispronunciation then.
You would think I know with Italians in my family, but I don't. So Rome, Italy. There's one in Hallstatt, Austria. Wamba Ossuary in Spain, Wamba, Spain. And Skull Chapel it's in Poland. You can just Google it because I'm not going to try.
Zermna, I think. Zermna.
I just thought it was the prop room for Hamlet, the Uric storeroom.
Does saying Hamlet curse podcasts like it does?
Or like Macbeth?
That's what I was thinking. Macbeth, not Hamlet. Never mind.
Break a leg.
Well, this is
So
our
I'm
13th episode too, I think. So
It is.
Oh,
It's our lucky
man.
13th episode. I forgot to
think-
say 13 at the beginning, but
we'll have some sort of skull action then.
you like us
sorry.
enough to keep us around for 13 episodes.
I know, we're like coven sized.
Sorry, I
I'm
butchered the names.
coven-sized.
Hey, you
all
know, you
right.
never have to.
Mm.
You never have to worry about that. It's so easy to not know how to pronounce things.
It's
So
it's really bad.
This
It
coming
really
from
does bring back the flashbacks of having to read out loud in English class.
well, you know, I tend to, rather than reading a lot, I tend to listen to a ton of audiobooks, and it's always
Mhm.
interesting because like I read mostly fantasy and science fiction, and it's interesting because how you read the book and would pronounce the names is very different all the time from when you hear the audiobook.
Mhm.
You know, how that, authors
yeah.
sort
Hi,
of
Game of Thrones.
exactly.
Right.
You had no
Like
idea that's what-
Dothraki, man.
Yeah.
exactly.
That's why I have a hard time listening to books and fiction
Mhm.
on audio, because it's all about that person who's reading it, their inflection, their tone of voice. And if it's not how I hear it in my head when I read,
Mhm.
it takes me out of it, or I just can't get into it. So I have to read in my head, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I really like to listen to books while I'm painting.
Yeah.
But the right
Yeah.
reader does need to be engaging.
Yeah.
There's been a couple books that are wonderful books, but the reader was not the best choice.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
Well,
a thing.
I have heard like a lot of, at least like celebrities that are writing books, they are biographies, will read their own
Mhm.
audiobook, because they obviously they know their story, they wrote the book and they lived it. So, and they're actors or they have experience. So it's also very entertaining from what I understand.
Oh yeah, I have a ton of
So.
books like Tina Fey's book, and a lot of different comedians like that have very good audiobooks to listen to.
I
But
like
digress.
listening to Nick Offerman.
Yeah, he's
Oh my
quite
God, I
funny.
love him. I love him so much. He's one of my favorites. Him and Megan Mullally together, I just
Those two are a treasure.
And I think
Oh.
it segues so well from piles of bones. It's interesting. I think it's interesting, this practice from the Aztec pile of bones to the Christian traditions, which probably were adaptations of earlier pagan traditions. And I find that very interesting.
Yeah, this is ironically something I did study when I was an anthropologist.
And so
and I couldn't find any postgraduate stuff because no one was studying funerary rites when I was applying for these things.
My cousin, she her PhD is in 16th century German literature, and she does a lot of studying of 1500s and medieval life. She gets papers on stuff like that, and she said that actually one way they're finding out more about women's lives is through funerary speeches and stuff like that, because so little was written about them. We got in a huge discussion, and you could probably even, when looking at, say, classic ghost stories in history, who is listened to and who isn't. The reason why we know so much, and we've gotten a little bit into this before, the reason why we know so much about Roman history and Greek history is because the Catholic Church really liked them and archived them. There was less interest in a lot of the, quote, barbarian societies, which they were not barbarian societies. That was just a racist view of Rome. They didn't like other societies that weren't Roman. And so there were a lot of perhaps even more advanced societies that were invaded by Rome. Romania, for example, the Dacian society was supposedly very advanced, but they had a lot of money and gold, and Rome basically liquidated their assets.
Yeah.
And that happened a lot. And there was no interest in, many people say they had no written history or anything, but we don't know. It was destroyed. They had no interest in proof. And even if you look at recent history where they're trying to save languages like, Welsh or Gaelic or, any of those, even UK languages. And when we talk about UK languages, and anthropologists, you probably, Europe was a patchwork of, would you say thousands of languages at least?
Oh yeah. Like we've always of differing degrees of difficulty and also familiarity.
Mhm.
So basically with languages, how they evolved is whenever you had a group separate and they were able to evolve in their own little hamlets, basically, you got different, similar languages, but they were just different enough that you could tell there was differences. And
Dialects.
dialects, basically. And it's a little even more than that. You'll get different words and stuff like that. I know in Japan, when I lived there, I lived in Nagoya, and there were still verbs that were used in the Tsubu and Kansai regions that are different than the Kanto region. And these are all just regional dialects of Japanese. It kind of isn't quite the same in America because you may have a bubbler for a water fountain, but it's kind of, everyone kind of knows that's what it is. Though I did chuckle at one of my friends calls a remote a clicker, and I'm like, oh, that's so cute and so Michigan of you.
Well,
And
and speaking of pronunciations, that means a lot of times different words in different areas are pronounced. So there is no perhaps correct pronunciation in a way.
yeah, they kind of evolve constantly.
I've heard, for example, Germany was not a united country till when, the late 1800s, and Italy as well. And so each, there were tons of dialects. Italian, as you know, it was not actually a unified language till Mussolini. It was a bunch of dialects. And when we visited Switzerland a few years ago, we stayed at Airbnb with a woman from Texas, and her husband was from Austria. And her husband could barely understand the German that they spoke in Switzerland because the dialect was so different that even he couldn't understand it that well. Northern Italian's closer to German than Southern Italian is. And so, and it's probably years of like before you had tribal, and China's the same. India.
That is so many different dialects
Yeah.
and even just regional variations. But just hitting super close to home, look at my last name. It's Klockow. Do you know what Klockow is?
What is it?
It is two different cities. One in Germany, it's actually more like a region, and a small city in Poland. And it's pronounced slightly differently depending on what side you're on. So the Klockow family pronounce it Klockow, like how I pronounce it, but it's also Klockow if you're in Poland or parts of Russia. And the only people that are ever able to pronounce their name correctly on the first try is one UPS driver and anybody from the Baltic states. So we don't really know the family history on his side, but that's just interesting how there's two Klockows. Going back to destruction of cultural heritage, going with the Aztecs, we actually don't know a lot what's happening. Mayan, Aztec, and Olmec, their codex got burned when the Spanish came through. So we don't have a lot of their literature, and we're still decoding their languages because of that. Mayan almost is a dead language. It's managed to get saved. If you go to like Cozumel or Cancun, you'll have a lot of people that will actually speak Mayan. They're not speaking Spanish. And I always find that interesting. Mayan is a super tricky language. I put it up there with like Swedish and Czech. It's tricky. And especially with reading, because if you're not familiar with the intonations, then you just get confused by all the consonants and vowels.
And how amazing would it have been to see those cities when they were at their peak? I mean, I can't imagine what our city will look like in thousands of years. And so they must have been extremely spectacular when they were
colorful.
And they were so much bigger than they thought. I mean,
they're huge. They were huge. They were expanding. We can go on about culture and all that, but I don't think that's why people are here.
That's okay. We're just this stuff just interests us.
Get on with the creepy stuff.
Get on with it. Yeah.
Okay.
You're an odd little anthropologist. Stop analyzing everything.
There's just too much interesting stuff to discuss.
Yes. Well, we got a lot of interesting local stuff to discuss tonight.
Okay. Well, flying back to Cincinnati.
We're going to go back to Cincinnati. much more recent on the scope of the world timeline than everywhere else that we've talked about tonight.
But this might be a good excuse to cover something like Serpent Mound or some of the mounds in Ohio, which used to be
Yeah,
territory.
yeah, the Hopewell culture. And we'll get to that. I would love to go to Chillicothe. I've never been to Serpent Mound. And
Definitely we'll do a trip.
I've been once.
Okay, and I'll try to find.
Really couldn't see it, but been there.
Yeah, it's something better seen from above.
Yeah.
But I'd really love to talk to like an anthropologist that has been studying the culture.
And I know how we could find one, actually.
Oh, yay. That makes my day.
Yay.
All right.
So going on to.
Yes. So we're going to, where did my disclaimer go? Oh, I put it down there. I'll do a quick disclaimer now before digging in. We do have a great story tonight to share with you, but trigger warning, it does talk about suicide. We'll talk a little bit about that further down. Right now, this is just the history bits, and we'll warn you again before we get to the darker stuff. So, hometown haunt tonight is the fabulous, the wonderful Cincinnati Observatory. And we've all been, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Christina's nodding her head.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, Christina, you went there for sketches.
Yes.
Jen, you've been there for sketches.
And for I went in college to look at something. Can't remember. It was a long time ago.
Yeah. And I've just been there because I'm a big fan of astronomy. It's one of the glue things that keep my husband and I together because we're big old astronomy nerds. So we own a telescope. We like to use it. I swear we only pointed at the sky. Anyway, so, all right. The Cincinnati Observatory is the oldest professional observatory in the United States. And its vintage status makes it ripe for ghost stories. And man, oh man, there are a lot of urban legends with it. Originally built in 1843 on the peak of Mount Ida by Ormsby Old Stars Mitchell, a retired Union Major General from the U.S. Civil War, an astronomer from Union County, Kentucky, who grew up in Lebanon, Ohio. Mitchell also published the first magazine in the United States dedicated to the study of astronomy, and he became one of the first mathematicians, philosophy, and astronomy professors at Cincinnati College, now known as the University of Cincinnati. Mitchell wanted an observatory very badly for the Cincinnati College and for the city, and it took him many years, but after the donation of 4 acres on Mount Summit by the eccentric wine merchant Nicholas Longworth, a telescope from actually Germany, from Munich, Germany, and the robust backing of the Cincinnati Astronomical Society, the Cincinnati Observatory cornerstone was laid November 9th, 1843. And I have this wonderful photo from, I'm going to assume the 1800s. It's not dated, but it's the Cincinnati, I can't read it. It's the telescope. It's a guy using the telescope. This was a big event and former President John Quincy Adams spoke at the dedication. This was the last public speech Adams did, and to mark the occasion, Mount Ida was renamed to Mount Adams. Yeah, that fun little place that had the incline, and it's really cool. Looks like, it's a nut. San Francisco. It looks like San Francisco with all the really tall buildings. The observatory stood on Mount Adams from 1843 until 1871, when it was moved to its current location on Mount Lookout, after the smoke pollution from downtown Cincinnati made Mount Adams' location unusable. The previous location was then turned into the Holy Cross Monastery and Church, which was used until 1977, when it was merged with the Immaculata Parish, creating the Holy Cross Immaculata Parish. Now the property is the headquarters, the corporate headquarters of Town Properties, a property management company in the city. When the new location was built in Mount Lookout off Observatory Avenue, the University of Cincinnati gained ownership of the observatory. The ground on which it stands was given to it says given to the city by John Kilgore in 1872. The Mitchell Building houses the original 1845 Mertz and Mahler telescope from Munich, Germany, from the previous observatory. In 1979, the observatory formally became part of the physics department of the University of Cincinnati, and in 1998, the Cincinnati Observatory was listed on the National List of Historic Places. Here's some fun facts for you. Fort Mitchell in Fort Mitchell, Kentucky is named after Ormsby Mitchell. Also, asteroid number 1373, Cincinnati, was named in honor of the staff of the observatory. It was discovered on August 30th, 1935. It was the only asteroid discovery made by famous American astronomer Edwin Hubble when observing distant galaxies at Mount Wilson Observatory in California. I kind of love that little connection with Hubble. I'm like, oh,
Yeah, that's pretty
really
cool.
The
Yeah.
instruments used, for those who care, like I do, and Mike, and a lot of other people, their 1845 Mertz and Mahler 11-inch refractor is housed in the Mitchell Building, may be the oldest continually used telescope in the world. It is currently used for public education programs. This was made in Munich, Germany. And the Mitchell Building is also referred to as the new building. And I'm sure we have photos along with it. This is the interior shots that you're seeing probably right now of the telescope. It's a large wooden telescope. It's very cool. The 1904 Alvin Clark and Sons 16-inch refractor, housed in the Herget Building, used in public education programs and graduate research. This is from Cambridgeport, Massachusetts. And the old building is the really prominent the photogenic building that you always see with a huge dome and the big columns, and it's 2 stories high. Yeah, that's the Herget Building, I believe. To this day, the Cincinnati Observatory is the core of the tri-state area's casual and serious interest in astronomy. Even in the state in 2020, they hold online stargazing, moon viewing, and lectures led by Dean Regas, the current director of the observatory, and also the Stone Lake Stargazers, which are the casual astronomy club of the area, do a lot through the observatory, as well as stargaze at Stone Lake State Park on really clear nights. I think there's a particular weekend every month that they meet. So, this is where the story takes a darker turn. And I want to note, like any haunted history location, somebody has to have passed away on the property for us to be talking about it. And this is, of course, the situation in this. So listener discretion is advised as we do talk about suicide. If you have thoughts of suicide or in emotional distress, please contact the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. And with that, we dive into the story of Dr. Smith. So, when I moved to Cincinnati, one of the first locations that I was told was haunted was the observatory. I was not told why, I was not told how, but it was supposedly haunted. Tonight, we dive into why this may be haunted, and it's a very interesting story. So the claims stem from the untimely death of former director of the observatory, Dr. Elliot S. Smith, in 1943. Dr. Smith was a very accomplished man. I mean, super accomplished. Born in Blue Earth County, Minnesota in 1875, he attended the University of Minnesota studying astronomy and graduated in 1903. From there, he had a fellowship at the University of California and assisted at the Lick Observatory from 1905 to 1906. He took postgraduate work at the University of Cincinnati and received his PhD there in 1910. I did not know our physics and astronomy department was that old. He became the professor of astronomy at UC and became the director of the observatory in 1940. He actually authored several books, such as The Catalog of Proper Motion Stars, a catalog of 4,683 stars observed by Elliot Smith, and his most popular, The Luminosity of Meteors and Comets. I really wish we could buy these. I don't know if they're available. He was an extremely patriotic man. He was a veteran of the Spanish-American War, a member of the Sons of the American Revolution, and was very proud of his son, Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Smith, as he had a career at West Point as a graduate and was serving in the Pacific Campaign during World War II in the Army Corps of Engineers. His daughter Harriet married Dr. Paul Herget, who ended up being a successor to Dr. Smith's position as director of the observatory. Dr. Herget became one of the pioneers in the use of electronic computing machines for astronomical calculations, and from 1947 until his retirement in 1978, the International Astronomical Union Minor Planet Center was housed at the Cincinnati Observatory. I did some background research on Dr. Paul Herget, and this man was a genius. He was doing all the calculations for the circumference of the planets by hand before calculators were a thing. And his list of honors, I believe, is slightly longer than Dr. Smith's. And when he passed away in 1981, NASA wrote a huge biography about him and his accomplishments. And I will say, I did look into his family a little bit to see if anybody was alive, if we had any survivors. And unfortunately, Harriet passed away in 1971 of cancer. Dr. Herget actually went above and beyond trying to get her cancer treatment aligned and with the right people. And unfortunately, she lost that battle. He did remarry and passed away in 1981. And his second wife passed away in 2006, and he has no children. So I hope I didn't come off as creepy, but anyway, moving on. At 7:30 a.m. on the morning of September 26, 1943, Dr. Smith left his home on Observatory Avenue. By 3:30 p.m. that day, his body was found hanging from the telescope mount by two site janitors, Dick Kuntz and Frank Ballinger, along with Professor Emeritus of Astronomy at UC, Dr. Everett Yole. Dr. Smith's coat and cane were hanging on the side of the telescope. The county coroner, Frank M. Kopic Jr., suspected that Dr. Smith had hung himself just after arriving at the observatory. So he had been dead about 8 to 10 hours by the time they found him. There was no suicide note found, but there were many stresses leading up to Dr. Smith's passing. The first was that he was chronically ill for several years and recently underwent an operation. He also had spent half a year in California in 1937, recovering from a severe spell of sickness, according to Dr. Yole. In addition to this, it had been reported, or rumored, that his son, Lieutenant Colonel Smith, had gone missing in action during the Pacific Campaign. This is where it got interesting, and I made the comment earlier that Mike joked that I was still urban legends detecting even while I was making dinner tonight. Why he said this was, I was looking into the family tree, as I just mentioned, and I discovered that Lieutenant Colonel Smith did not die during World War II. He survived that war, he served in Vietnam, and he was given many, many prestigious medals by the Army Corps of Engineers for his service. And he too has passed away, and I could not find any children that he had. But he did survive, which makes this suicide all more sad if that was what had happened. We don't know. This is conjecture, but that's one of the rumors, is that Dr. Smith had passed away because he was afraid his son was gone forever. I will say, judging by how his friends reported him, he was chronically ill, may have suffered from depression. So did that have anything to do with it? Who knows? I don't really like speculating. I just give ideas. So, the reported hauntings. Like I said, the observatory is allegedly haunted, and I have this wonderful quote from the current director, Dean Regas, from 2015. And he said, "The observatory is allegedly haunted. The claim has been made, but I don't think it's true at all. As someone who has been here almost every day for 15 years, daytime, nighttime, middle of the night, with groups or alone, a cold, dark, spooky night, or even once on Halloween, I have never seen, heard, sensed a spirit in the building." And this was quoted from an interview by Leela Shokuhi for the Cincinnati Refined magazine in 2015. So, docents at the observatory, however, have reported some spooky things going on that they can't explain. However, on pressing what it may be, there is always really nondescript, or in reality, probably very mundane things that are happening. Like a cold spot once in a while, hearing something a little off in the distance, but things that people generally will think, well, we're in the middle of a city, so maybe it's something like that. But there is some interesting side notes here. They did bring in a ghost hunting group in 2009 to investigate the observatory, which I find really impressive, because I didn't think that somebody who would be as skeptical. This is going to sound judgmental. I'm sorry. Usually, I don't think of scientists bringing in paranormal groups to study their locations of work. That just seems like, why? But I don't know why. But this happened. So in 2009, the Spiritual Historians of Paranormal Evidence, also known as the Spiritual Hope Society, did a visit and did record some anomalies that they mentioned in a newspaper article from 2010. They found ghostly music and unexplained voices throughout the buildings. And according to docents that kind of knew about this, they focused a lot in the basement. And I couldn't find any photos of the basement. I don't know what it looks like. In 2010, the Spiritual Hope Society led a public ghost hunt at the observatory to help raise funds to keep the observatory open during the recession, which I think is great. In 1997, however, this is an interesting story. An associate professor, Chris Curran, happened to call the observatory only to be answered by a garbled voice over the phone that sounded distant. Thinking that she had encountered a broken answering machine, however, after further inquiry, she discovered that the answering machine had been turned off. So that is the only real spooky ghost story I could find about the Cincinnati Observatory. But actually, weird phone shenanigans from haunted locations is something I've heard about before. So, thank you for listening to my TED Talk. I'm done.
Oh, that was really interesting.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it in the late 1800s, when this was built, I mean, everybody was sort of into astronomy. That was the time of the Harvard Observatory being built, Tesla, science, all those world fairs.
Yes.
I mean, and Lowell, Percival Lowell. Was he a little later, or was he's a little later, maybe
A little bit.
a little bit later, but you had the serializations of H.G. Wells happening along those times, Jules Verne.
Well, you had that first movie. I think it was A Journey to the Moon.
Yes, that was the
yeah.
late 1900s. Yeah, I mean that whole late 1800s, early 1900s seems like it was a really interesting time of speculation, and at the time wasn't being an astronomer was kind of a gentlemanly profession.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like sort of a leisure hobby that and that was I illustrated a children's book about Annie Jump Cannon in 2010, and that's when I got to paint, because the telescope that's in the Cincinnati Observatory was the same one that used to be at Harvard, and so there's pictures of both of them, and I have a picture of Annie Jump Cannon at the telescope that was at Harvard, but it looks a lot like the one that's still at the observatory. So that's one of the few places where you can still see one of these antique.
Big wooden thing. It's really cool seeing how the telescope tucks into the dome.
Yes.
Yeah, and we had the privilege, I guess, a few years, it was 18 months ago, 2019, we happened to go to the Cincinnati Observatory because my father-in-law really loves astronomy as well. That's where Mike gets his love of science. And for Father's Day, we went out to dinner, and on our way home, we passed by the observatory. And Mike's like, "Hey, do you want to go see our observatory? It's one of the oldest in the country." So he went there, and we happened to be there when no one else was there but the docents, and they opened up the dome for us to moon view, which was a fantastic opportunity and quite memorable and very important. It's an important family memory for us because we got to take our at the time infant son to go see the moon basically, and my father-in-law was just so jazzed being able to get up onto the seats and look through this old telescope that you don't get to see anymore. It's made out of wood and brass, and it's really cool, and they've done a really great job maintaining it. So but it's a sad story with Dr. Smith, and his death made national headlines. I found the story all the way in Oklahoma, the news story about his death. So he was an important character to astronomy, especially locally. And what I also found interesting is the fact that it was rumored that his son had become a POW, or at least MIA in action, almost as an excuse as to why he hung himself. But doing some research, he survived. He came back. He did a lot of stuff. And so I don't think that's exactly why Dr. Smith committed suicide. Although it was a good scapegoat at the time, I guess.
What year did he pass?
1943.
The people that would know what happened are very, very old.
All gone.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a thing that's difficult when you illustrate something that's real, is especially if you're looking at old photos and stuff. It's super hard to find good reference, to illustrate stuff like that. So, like, one thing I wanted to know when I had to paint Annie Jump Cannon is what color were her eyes? And we actually did talk to someone that had known her and told us what color her eyes were, and knew them still, but they were extremely old. Like, this woman was in her 80s, and
wow.
There's a lot of stuff that we have to approach as illustrators that when you're writing a book, you don't think about, well, what did this look like? And it's really difficult to, we're segueing to our earlier conversation about what gets kept culturally. If you have to draw something from the 1800s, you think, oh, there's tons of stuff around. No, there's not tons of stuff around. If you're wanting to draw something that existed, that people used regularly, that's no longer used, it's really hard to find it. There wasn't a lot of photographs back then. There's just not a lot of stuff around to look at. And when you're trying to, some of the stuff I was had to illustrate was pictures of them doing experiments when she was in college, and I have no idea I'm not a historian. And so I had to ask a lot of people, what would you have drawn? Like, there was one picture of her with her class at Wellesley, and there's all this equipment, and I asked somebody that works at a physics lab, that was a colleague of one of my cousins, and he said, well, they're not doing anything. It looks like they just had all the girls pose around like the stack of lab equipment, said, get all the cool lab equipment out and pose everyone around it. They weren't doing anything.
Funny.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to tell. And schools don't keep that stuff because they want the latest. You're not going to keep your glassware from the 1800s. That goes to a museum or is thrown away. And so that's why it's so wonderful they still have this old telescope, because most of that stuff just gets thrown away.
Or not just thrown away, but burned. A lot of these places, there's accidents. I know this happens a lot with historical records. We have missing records from dotting all over the world, basically, because storage houses go up in smoke. Or there's earthquakes or natural disasters that take them out. That's why digitizing all these articles is very important, because it gives us a safer way of storing everything. And we have these new, like, heck, referencing back to the Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities, we have a digitized 1894 article about the mermaids of the Ohio River. Now, we don't have the original Cincinnati Enquirer one. We have the Akron Beacon Journal, I think is what it is. But it's the same article. They just syndicated it. So, yeah, it's so important.
It really is easy to lose history. And that's why, back to our discussion of really ancient history of civilizations from early Europe or the Maya or whatever, we don't really know. And a lot of stuff, they dig up stuff and have no idea what it is. And unfortunately, I think the way a lot of people that are archaeologists think about things is they think in a very linear thing, like, oh, well, they were really primitive then and we're much, but we don't know that. I mean, there could have, this gets into a pet peeve of mine, because I think there were pretty advanced societies a long time ago that we just don't know anything about them. I mean, if our society disappeared right now, who would know what was left of it? Because like you were talking about digitizing everything, well, you have to have something. I can't even read my zip drives from the 90s, or my zip disks.
Yeah.
So how
Right.
on earth do you archive things? As an artist, and you probably deal with this too, how do you archive your stuff so you can keep it for years? The technology and what you store it on keeps changing. So you end up with this digital catalog of work you've done since you could catalog it digitally. And so you scan in your old little discs. Like I used to keep everything on CDs. Well, I don't even have a CD player on my latest computer. So how do you access that knowledge? And so it's interesting when looking at history, how much is lost and how little we know and how biased the archiving of that history is.
Yeah, and I know dealing with the biasness of the archiving of history and interpretation of history has changed a lot, especially in the past 20 years.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about anthropology because that's the science I know the best. And basically, when it was started by nobility or the aristocrats that had time to go out into the field and dig for bones or for pots or whatnot. And if you read some of the earlier interpretations of anything, Hopewell culture, if we want to be local, I remember reading case studies written by not armchair anthropologists, but hobbyist anthropologists saying that dead people were buried under these mounds. Why would they just bury artifacts? Like they just couldn't get that through their head. I believe Thomas Jefferson had a few mounds on his properties that he bulldozed at one point and just kept the artifacts. So we have no context. But then you also have all these people were male at the time doing this science. And in the 60s, you started getting more females and people of color and people from the LGBTQIA communities coming in. And you're getting different reference points for looking at an artifact. And suddenly you're getting different interpretations. And now we have a much broader sense of ways to interpret the data that we're getting. That's why, like I said, the skull tower that I reported on earlier, the report now is vastly different than even the case studies I would have read 15 years ago, because you have not just men on the archive groups going through, not the archive groups, but the actual science trips, because you have women and indigenous people who know the culture better from oral tradition also giving their input and saying maybe we can interpret it this way. So
well, and that's the thing I find fascinating about astronomy too, is we see so little, and you're trying to get giant theories about the construction of the universe by seeing very little of them. And it's interesting to see how that science evolves as well. The Hubble telescope's been really interesting, the stuff that it sees. And wasn't there recently, what was since you follow this sort of thing, the Betelgeuse thing, where they thought it was going to go supernova and it hasn't, but it kind of darkened.
Oh, I actually missed that one, but yeah. Jen, do you have any thoughts?
I do. Sometimes it's hard to get a word in between you two.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Sorry,
I'm drinking water, so you got plenty of time now.
So I was just going to say, have you, either of you ever, and I'm not sure if this is open to the public, but contacted the Union Terminal Museum Center and done a tour of their archives?
I haven't been able to.
Certainly,
I want to.
we plan to. It's just COVID's made it difficult. We'd like to sketch
Okay.
the ruins and stuff there.
So that is open to the public, because I've been on it a couple times through work where it was just work related.
I think it depends on what it is in the archive, because I know like the historical archives are open. That's how I did a lot of book research for Ohio's Haunted Crimes.
Oh, I'm talking about the artifacts, the stuff.
I think that depends on who's in that day and what they want to show you.
Okay, because I've gotten to see not all of it, but a lot of it, and it's really cool. And I'm sure they'd be more than willing, if they have it, to show it to you, because they're just as excited about it as we are. And the 2 times I went, I got the same tour guide, and he is always excited to show a Civil War Lancer for medical procedures.
Oh.
And I just love it. And he always holds it up. Does anybody know what this is? And I'm like, yes, but only because I've been on the tour before.
I would love to sketch. I mean, we'd love to sketch and see some of their archives and take our, I mean, we went and sketched their shrunken head exhibit that they had.
Maybe,
and that was so cool.
I wonder if that's something we could do through Urban Sketchers, because the stuff that they've got is so cool. Like, they've got almost every kind of form of TV, since the beginning. They have record players, they have all these old games, and you walk in there and it's not only visual, but you can smell the stuff. It's not a bad smell, but it's just, and then you have that, like, just to document humanity, but then they also have dinosaur bones.
Yeah, I'm a little stuck on the shrunken heads. Did you say they have shrunken heads?
Well, this was an exhibit.
Were they authenticated?
Yes. I mean, it was one of those things where they had to, like, they had a couple mummies and they had some shrunken heads and stuff. And again, that's another thing that's very touchy to have as a display, because how respectful is it to those cultures that made them?
Yeah, because the shrunken heads have become just a big hoopla. Like,
oh, totally.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was quite the hoopla then. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. I want to say like 3 or 4 years ago, we went and sketched them, and it was a big deal that the museum center had this exhibit. Did you go to it, Jen?
No, I didn't.
It was really interesting, but like, as you said, it is somewhat controversial now to even, and they wanted people to be respectful, and they tried to say, look, these are,
these were people.
These were people in their culture and stuff.
Yeah.
I am now the body exhibit, and that
I went to that.
That's an interesting one.
I was all jazzed and psyched about going to, and as soon as I got in there, I was just like, oh, this makes me really uncomfortable. Like, it hit me on such a visceral level that I couldn't stay there. And my mom, who was a nurse, and my sister, who worked in a hospital, was like, oh, this is so cool. And I'm like, I need to get out of here. Like, I don't know. It just made me really uncomfortable.
And there's reasons to be uncomfortable about it, because I believe they thought some of those were dissidents that were,
yes,
like perhaps all the participants in those in that
may not have willingly donated.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
So I have pasted in our document some articles about, there was all this speculation that Beetlejuice was about to explode. People have different thoughts about it and stuff.
Okay.
But you can read about it and check it out and see what you think. Because it was, I believe it was darkening. I read a bunch of stuff a couple weeks ago about it, and I don't remember all the details because I read too much stuff to remember everything.
Right.
Yeah.
So what happens if it goes supernova?
Scientists will be super excited to see it. They think it might be closer than they thought. I mean, they think there's a lot of, again, there's a lot of theories about, its chemical makeup and what the lives of stars are. Obviously, if you observe a supernova, you hope you're far enough away from it to
get sucked in or obliterated.
Yeah. We wouldn't know the rate. I don't remember how far Betelgeuse is, but yeah, it would go supernova. We'd be able to see it probably even during the day, and then we'd. I don't know if we get slowly pulled in. Like I said, I forget how far away it is. So
Oh, that's kind of terrifying.
yeah,
I mean, I know slowly in space terms could mean like hundreds of thousands of years, but
Yeah.
yeah. I believe this is actually a Doctor Who episode. So
Let's see. It says here that the supergiant star has been behaving strangely in recent months. Could it be about to go supernova? And so it said in the constellation of Orion, something strange is afoot. In October 2019, the red star Betelgeuse, which marks Orion's bright shoulder, or left as we look at it, began to get unusually dim. During January and February 2020, it reached a record low, about 40% of its usual brightness. We know that Betelgeuse is a mature star and that one day it will explode into a supernova, but this dimming has led to speculation that a supernova could be imminent. Might this be a moment of calm before the star expires in a cosmic death blast? The dimming of Betelgeuse, the name of the star, has its origins in Arabic, and there's no consensus on how to pronounce the westernized version. See, again, no one knows how to pronounce it.
I know.
But
I know.
Betelgeuse, what?
It's pronounced Michael Keaton.
Yes,
I was gonna say that.
Is not
Ching.
It's what's known as a variable star whose brightness fluctuates. In Betelgeuse's case, this fluctuation follows a roughly 420-day cycle, and in line with this cycle, there are now signs the star is slowly brightening again. And there's more about it, but it's not, and we're not talking about haunted stuff anymore. But since we were talking about observatories, we can geek out a little bit about them.
Space.
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, again, we will talk about aliens at one point, so why not?
Yeah, we'll talk about anything. Clearly, we've talked about the Aztec, we've talked about ossuaries tonight, and we've talked about the Cincinnati Observatory. So
And I have some haunts that I put in.
Yeah, I was about to say, and we have some haunts to share.
Woo-hoo. And the first hometown haunt is a local hometown haunt. Do you want to read that, Jen? So the first one is from Scott. Who you know, Scott from Urban Sketchers. We've just outed him. I can get this out. But it's about the theater group on the west side, I believe, the Westwood Theater Group.
Okay, so Jen, do you want to read Scott's and I'll read David?
Yes, please.
Yes. Oh, I just found it. Okay.
Woo!
This from Scott. I was working backstage at Westwood Town Hall for a production of The Odd Couple. I had heard others in the crew talk about Wesley, the ghost who supposedly haunts that theater. They had all kinds of creepy stories. I don't believe in ghosts and insist on evidence. Working backstage is mostly sitting around, and my hangout spot was on the stairs on stage left. One night, I sat down on a loose screw that was just left on the stairs. I saw a hole in the old plaster wall, and I thought I would just throw it in there, and it would never be seen again. But wait, I had a Sharpie, and I muttered quietly, "Okay, Wesley, I'm going to put a special mark on the screw head, and I'm going to throw it in that hole where nobody would ever be able to get it. So if you're real, then put this where I'll see it again." The next night, I sat on those stairs, and there was a loose screw in the same spot, and it had that mark on it. That's creepy.
Oh, never challenge the dead or spirit. Oh my goodness.
That's asking for trouble.
Yeah, I believe that's horror movie fodder.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's a good story, though.
It is a very good story.
I love that story. Yes, I
Thank you, Scott.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
And now another friend of the show, Alexa, also works at that theater company, is really hoping to see more of Wesley. And she was more upset that why didn't anyone tell her that there was a ghost she could have been talking to.
I'm sure Wesley will come by and say hello at some point.
Mm-hmm. He sounds a little friendly.
Yeah, putting screws on stairs, that
so you can
that sounds like Home Alone stuff going.
Well, as long as he doesn't have swinging paint buckets or something coming.
That's true.
Right.
Well, it's backstage. So our second story is from David, and he writes, "Oh yes, so I was visiting my dad's house about a year before he died. I had a room upstairs that had an old chest of drawers in it. Nosy as I am, I looked inside of it when I was getting ready to sleep that evening. It was filled with jewelry boxes, old Rolex watches, and other small boxes. I did not think much of it, as my stepmother had a lot of old stuff. That night, I woke up with an odd feeling and turned over and looked at the wall where the chest of drawers was. I saw, in my surprise, a white, dim outline of a woman in her nightgown with one hand on her chest. I was freaked and oddly curious. I said, "Hello?" She just stared forward and said nothing. I moved again and she was gone. The next day, I figured it was me saying things and I didn't think about it until the next night. I was a bit nervous to sleep in that room again, but figured it was a figment of my every active mind. I fell asleep and woke up around 2 a.m. to find her there again, standing exactly as she did the night previous. This time, I sat up in my bed and she disappeared. I did not sleep in that room again.
Yep, don't blame him. Nope.
That
I
sounds
don't know
kind
what she wanted.
So that story your friend had, Jen, where they had seen the where they were in the room with the.
Mhm.
I mean, that
She
story
had-
had so much stuff.
It had a lot going on in that, like challenging a ghost, it
Yeah.
threw a figurine at her forehead.
Yeah. Man.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, David. That was a wonderful story.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing. And if you would like to share your own hometown haunt and have myself, Jen, or Christina read them on air, you can send them to cincycuriosities@gmail.com.
Well, I guess that means that we're coming to the end.
This is the end of another wonderful, the lucky 13th episode of the Cincinnati Curiosities Hometown Haunts.
Yay.
So,
Yay.
yay!
And next week, I think we're talking about holiday ghosts, and that's
We are. Speaking of holidays, happy Hanukkah.
Yes.
Happy Hanukkah.
I'm sorry this is at the end of the show, but happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah.
Well, it's the end of Hanukkah, pretty much. So
Mm.
it's just a couple days left, right? And so
Yeah.
the end of the show, end of Hanukkah. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's totally on purpose.
Mm.
Happy
Yeah, we totally
mistakes.
planned that. Happy mistakes.
Uh-huh.
So next week we are talking about more festive spirits in the vein of the Yule cat and ghosts at Christmas. So with that, thank you for joining us. This is Kat Klockow, the host of the Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities Hometown Haunts. With me is Christina Wald, Jen Koehler, and we'll see you next week. Keep it spooky.
Bye.